Okay, so for the first thing, let's just collapse these layers that we don't need anymore. And I'm going to make a new text one called handles. It's going to be our handles text. Handles text. And let me left align that so it doesn't go off the screen. And then just to be consistent, I'm going to change that back to the same size as the frames and slate. And I'm going to place that right here. You could move this around to wherever you want. And again, for my students watching this, we're not going to go over handles really, so you don't need to worry about this. But just to explain what handles are. So if you're working in production and you're given the plates, and they'll give you either just a standard 24 frame handles or 48 frame handles, or they'll give you a cut. And generally they will give you a cut and you can match it up. So they'll have trimmed those plates down to cut off usually part at the beginning and then part at the end. And what the handles tells you is what part of the shot is not going to be, or it's not planned to be, in the cut. So this generally, I mean, you kind of get lazier as you increase into the handles on the tail end or at the very beginning of the handles on the head handles. So it just kind of is an indication of what you probably don't need to spend as much time on. Now, obviously, they can make up their mind and say, well, we need the handles to be completely done, and we might need to use that. But it just gives the editor a little bit of leeway of just moving that shot in a few more frames to the end of the shot or to the beginning of the shot. And you really shouldn't be lazy, but we're artists and kind of are a little bit lazy when it comes to that. Anyway, so right, so we're going to do the handles, and I'm going to show you how to set that up, but there's no actual example I have of what the handles are. You just have to look up what your client gives you with your cut, place that in your shot, line it up with the frames, unless they just tell you how many handles it is, but you should probably always check anyway. Anyway, so the first thing, we need the handles text, and then we're going to make two other layers. We're going to make one called handles head, and then we're going to say control, and then I'm going to make another one called head, or I'm going to handles tail control. And it is important that you type exactly what I'm typing if you want to follow along with the expression. Otherwise, you'll have to change it in the actual expression as well, because we're going to be referring to these layers. And I'm going to turn off the visibility here. And then what we're going to do is we'll actually add another. So we're going to do handles head and then handles tail again. Let's duplicate that. So one of them is going to be simply a way of controlling it, and the other two are going to be what is visually determined as a handle. So if we pop over to, whoops, let me change my handles text. Let me just trim that down. Alt bracket on that, so that's gone. So the way that I've often seen handles denoted is with a little box that appears over the frame. So when you see a little box go behind the frame, that means that, hey, now you're looking at handles, so it's stuff that's probably not going to be in the final cut. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to move these 4 layers to the bottom, and I'm going to color code the control ones. I'm going to just make those yellow or something, just so I know that these are never going to be visible. These are actually going to be visible. So I could turn those on, and actually, you know what? I'll turn tail off just for now. I'm going to click on the rectangle tool and then hold down shift, just make a little square. And I probably want to make both of these not very opaque. Let's say like 25% on the transparency there, so they kind of show through. And what these are going to indicate is that, hey, now we're looking at the handles. But in order to do this properly, we need to animate this mask, because with a single digit, it looks great, and then as soon as you get into 10, and then if you go into 100, it's going to move over. So we need to animate the mask that moves over every time a new digit is added. So this is just going to be manual work, but then you will never have to do it again, and it'll be great. So we're going to do mask pass on frame 9, and then on frame 10, we're going to animate the mask path and just pull it out a little bit, so there's a little bit more room there. And then we're going to go all the way to frame 900, or 99 rather, not 900. Okay, then we're going to set another keyframe, and then go forward to frame 100, and then pull out the mask path again. So that is going to move it over every time the digit is extended. So that's pretty straightforward, not a lot going on here. And actually I could copy this mask and add it to the tail as well, just make sure those are correct. And by the way, so the U key to see all your keyframes, the the J and K keys step between your keyframes. They're pretty useful tools if you didn't realize. Okay, so let's go into the expressions now. So what we're going to be using is these two layers down here. So we have the handle's head and then the handle's tail. And I'm just going to, since head comes before tail, I'm just going to reorder those. Okay, so wherever this layer is, so if I trim this layer and just say like, okay, let's say our handles are just standard 24 frame handles. So they come to here. So on 25, then they'll turn off. We would have to manually control where that turned off and where it turned on. So we'd have to do the same thing that we just did down here, but have to animate the opacity manually to turn that off. So we're going to be using an expression to automate the opacity based on wherever this layer ends. And it's a little bit complicated, but it's very, very useful to do. Okay, so what we're going to do on handle's head control is click T for opacity, hold down the Alt key, and we're going to animate the opacity via the expression. So pop back over into Notepad++, and the first thing we're going to do is make a new variable called turn off. So turn off is a really, really tiny number, and what this is going to be used for is how quickly does that turn off. So this expression is could be used as a slow fade in or fade out, but we just want to have it snap on and snap out. So that's going to be extremely short, so it'll just be less than 1 frame, so we can just turn it on and off. All right, so the expression is math.ceil. Then we're going to do linear time and then out point minus turn off, comma, out point, and then these values here, 25 and 0, is what does it start at, so 25% opacity, and then what does it end at, so it's going to end at 0, and then close those. Let's copy this and then paste that in right here. So right now nothing is going to happen because we haven't linked this opacity yet, but we will in a moment. So I'm going to do nearly the same thing for the tail control. Pop back into Notepad, and then we're going to say a turn on variable, and we're going to do the same number. We're going to do a really, really tiny number. Then we're going to do math.ceil linear time. Then this time is going to be the endpoint, and then the endpoint plus turn on. And then it starts at 0, and then it would end at 25. So copy that, paste that in. And the next step is we have to link these controls down here to these down here, because this layer, for instance, this is actually controlling what is visible, what is an actual pixel. These didn't even need to be solids, these could be null objects, but we're using that simply as like this little slider that we can pull across the screen. So what we're going to do is on the actual pixels, the handle pixels, we're going to all click on opacity, but instead of writing in an expression at the bottom, we're going to use the pick whip. So on the pick whip, we're going to look over to the handle's head control, make sure you get the right one, so head handles, and then click enter. And you can see that now that disappeared because the handle was reached. But if I increase that, you can see that, oh, well, there you go. Now my handle is larger. So now it turns off, which is very, very useful. So now we're going to do the same thing down here. Click T for opacity, hold down the Alt key, go to the pick whip, and then attach that to the opacity of the control, the handle's tail control, and click enter. So these are actually the full length, and let me turn this back on. So generally this is going to be something like this. So if this was the end of your shot, let's say at frame 90, and this is what your shot was, and you had like the most ridiculously small shot and you had a huge handles for some reason, well, that would work. Okay, or if you realize, oh, they made a mistake, you can just move the handles, or if you get another cut, you can just simply move the handles and then they'll line up. So that's the first part. The second part, which is quite a bit more complicated actually, is to display the handles up here. So how this is going to work is we're going to look at the handle's head control and the handle's tail control, and then look at the in point and out point of these layers. So we're going to calculate how many frames this layer occupies and then return that, and then we can write in how many head handles and tail handles there are here. So then as we change these, this will update. So if we go over here and let's say, okay, we need 15 frames at the beginning for the head handle, and then however many frames that is. And actually the first thing that we have to do though, if we pop over to Notepad, we have to define a function to determine whether we're going to say frame or frames. So we need to know if there's going to be the plural. So if there's one frame handle, then we need to write one frame, but if it's like 10 frames or anything besides one, it's going to be frames. So it's quite simple to do, and grammar is important, so let's do that. So let's do function, and I'm going to call this plural, and I'm going to give that a parameter of x, and then I'm going to do curly braces, tab over, I don't need a space there, and then we're going to do f equals the string frame, and then I'm going to write a condition statement and say, well, if x is equivalent to or equals 1, I'm going to return f. So this is one frame, so f is just frame, okay? But otherwise, if it's not 1, if it's 0, or if it's anything above 1, we're going to return f, but then we're going to add on s at the end of it. So that's simply going to be if it's frame or frames, okay? All right, so the next part, we're going to define another variable called frame head, and this one's quite long. So we can do math.round and then 3 open parentheses. I'm going to say this comp.layer, and what I'm writing here, this is the name of the layer that has the control on it. So if you didn't label it the same as me, you're going to have to change this part, otherwise it's not going to work. And I'm going to subtract this comp dot layer, and this is actually going to be the same thing, so I'm going to just copy that. The only difference is we're going to say endpoint, endpoint, and then we're going to multiply that by 1 divided by this comp dot frame duration. And then at the very end, we're going to say -1. Otherwise, it will always return 1. So if you have, because a layer in After Effects has to at least occupy 1 frame, but it's definitely possible that you could have 0 handles at the beginning or the end. So that's why we have to do a -1. All right, so next one, we're going to do frame tail. And this is going to be very similar. So we're just going to do map.round and this comp.layer. And then this is going to be handles tail control. We could probably just copied and pasted this and just replace the name of the file, but whatever. And then we're going to do, oh, did I miss something? Handles tail. Okay, that's good. And then this comp.layer, and then I'm going to copy this layer name again and do the endpoint. Then I'm going to multiply that by, again, I'm just going to copy this section up here, paste that in, and then -1. And I don't know what I don't know how this got here, so let's just delete that. And okay, so this value here, this variable frame head, is going to determine how long is handle's head control, okay? That's all that's doing. And then the same for the frame tail. So now we actually have to write that onto the screen. So we're going to say frame head plus, and then we're going to have a space. And then we need to do call the function plural. So we're calling this, and we're going to pass that the frame head to determine if we're going to say frame or frames. And then we're going to do space, and it's going to be the head. And I don't need a space there. There we go. Actually, you know what? I probably do. Yeah, definitely do. Right. And then I'm going to do frame tail. And then again, another space. And then we're going to say plural of frame tail. And then we're going to add at the very end tail and then handle at the end. There we go. All right, so let me just check this frame head space. Oh, whoops. That's definitely supposed to be a plus, not an equals. And hopefully this works. Alright, so copy, and I scroll up to the handles text, I'll click on source text, paste, boom. Okay, so this is determining there are 15 frames at the beginning, and if I change this, you can say, alright, so there you go, we're just altering the tail handles, this is altering the frame head handles, and if you have one frame on the head handles, put that onto one frame, it actually writes one frame, and it does the same thing for the end. So this is a neat little thing that's actually quite simple to do. I wish more people would do that, kind of bugs me, but there you go. So that's how you do your handles. And before we do the last section, let me just clean up this. I just want to move some of these. So these things here don't specifically need to stay below the control. I'm going to pull these up because at the very end I'm going to show you how you can hide all of this stuff. You probably want to keep these control layers on just so you can always see them and they're always visible at the top, but we're going to hide all the rest. And the way we're going to do that is with the shy up here. So we can click shy and then click on those and then they'll all disappear. Alright, for this last part we're going to go up to layer, new, and then we're going to do an adjustment layer, and we're going to call this sample color. And on the sample color, we're going to grab a sample color expression, or sample image is what it's called. So sample image. And there's a utility called sample image. We can drag that on here. And what this is going to give us is this little target. So we need to move the target down to where our frame counter is, and then just have it, somewhere off to the side. So it doesn't really matter where it is, but somewhere pretty close by. And this is going to sample any color below it. So let's move this down underneath your handles. So then you could put that really, really close right there. So anything below sample color, it will sample the value. So then your handles don't actually get in the way of that, because that would affect the color as well. Okay, so if you have something really, really bright that's going to go behind really, really dark, we're going to say, all right, so take whatever value this finds, and then we're going to convert that value from an RGB into a HSL, so a hue, saturation, and lightness value, and then we're going to basically invert those values, okay? So what we need to do first is to go up to the frame counter, and then we need to add a fill effect. So if we click the fill effect, by default it will make everything red. You can just leave it at that if you wanted to. It will go away when this starts working, so it's kind of something really obvious that if that's not red, it's working. So what we need to do next is just to add a little bit more clarity to this. There's one called a drop shadow. So I'm going to add a drop shadow effect, and this is pretty good to just add a little bit of a shadow, like a little border around it. And you could say like the distance is 2 or something, or distance 3 if that's a little bit too far away. So that's pretty good. And I'm going to do the same thing on this. So I'm going to do drop shadow, I'm going to say 2. So if I turn off the background there, you can see that's just going to make it a little bit more readable. Okay, alright, so let's move on to animating the fill. Alright, so the next step is to go over to the color, hold down Alt, and click on the stopwatch. So we're going to be adding an expression here. And for this next part, actually, I'm going to scroll down and open up the sample color, just simply so I can show you where we're getting some of these names from. Let me just click on that. Let's go back into Notepad++. And this is not going to be quite as long as that previous one, but it's still, there's quite a lot of variables to write. So the first one, we're going to say RGB. We're going to set that equal to this comp dot layer, and this is the name of that layer. So looking at sample color, and then what effect in that layer? Well, we're looking at the sample image effect, and then specifically what part of that effect? We're looking at the sampled color output. So sample color is sample color down here, the name of that layer. The effect is the sample image effect, which is this, and then the sampled color output is this specific channel. So we're going to say sample color output, and that should be good for that. Enter, and then we're going to define HSL, so this is going to be the hue, saturation, and lightness. And there's a function called RGB to HSL. So this is going to convert RGB values into HSL values. And we're going to pass that this value. So whatever this is, so this is what is actually sampling. So whatever this target right here, whatever color that happens to be over that point, is going to be passed and saved as the RGB value, and then this is going to store the conversion of that RGB in a hue, saturation, and lightness value. So we're gonna make one called hue, because this one is going to be hue, and on the HSL, since this is an array, that's going to be stored in the first index. So and indices start with 0, so that's how we're labeling this. So on the first one, that's going to be the hue. The second one is going to be the saturation, and saturation is the HSL on the first or the second index, so index 1. I don't really want any saturation at all, so I'm just going to multiply that to 0, so no saturation at all. And then we have lightness. So HSL, and then we're going to say it's actually in the third index, which is actually index number 2. And this is the importance part. So these values are actually stored from 0 to 1, not 0 to 255. So this is why I'm doing 0.5. And then we're going to do mod 1. Okay, the next one we're going to do alpha, and alpha equals HSL on index 3. And then I'm going to do new HSL, and that's going to be the index, the index of the hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha. And then lastly, we're going to do HSL to RGB. I'm going to pass that the value of the new HSL. Alright, so this is quite a lot of code just to simply say, take whatever value the sample color output has, put that in a variable, convert that to an HSL value, separate out the hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha, just so we can change the saturation and lightness, plug that back into a new array, and take that HSL value and convert it back to RGB so the fill effect on the frame counter can use it. So that will make your frame counter more readable if the same color passes behind the frame counter. So it's kind of a lot of steps here, but it's pretty straightforward. Let's go into the frame counter for the fill. We already alt-clicked on the color, so there's our expression, and we're going to paste this. So just to demonstrate that this actually does work, let's make a new solid, and I'll just call it, that's fine, and I'll just make this little box. And what actually started me on this process originally was I was working on a shot that a white van passed over the frame counter, and for quite some time it was covering it. And I thought, well, I wonder if there's a way to automatically do this, and this is why I spent some time trying to figure it out. So now I have this red little mask passing over here, and you can see that when it covers that sampled region, now it turns black, so it would show up a lot more easily than if it did not change the color. And then you could do things like, you could change this to like the black, and you can see that then that will turn to a white color, or a much lighter color. And then you could do any color you want, it doesn't really matter, and it's going to change accordingly. You can just move around here and you can see this updating, which is quite cool. So it happens immediately, which is pretty interesting. Okay, so that is all we have to do for scripting. And the final thing to do is to figure out what we want to save or what we want to have visible. So most of the time you don't want any of these visible. You just want to have the handles, controls, these layers, they should be visible. So the way that we do that is there's a little shy button on, you might have to go to your toggle switches modes to access this. So we're going to click the little shy button on all of these except for these two layers over here. So even the background slate, we don't want to see that. And then on the top there's a master shy button, so we click that, and then all the other ones disappear. And then if you realize, hey, I don't even need handles for this for some reason, you can just shy those too. So now you're not bogged down with having like 16 different layers of stuff you don't ever really want to see, and then have to keep scrolling down just to access your plates and your effects and other layers that you need. So this is the best solution I found. I'm sure there's other ways too, but this is what I use and it works really well for me. And the final thing is I'm just going to show you how you would use this. So how do you import this? So I'm just going to change the name of this comp, otherwise it's always going to show up as that shot number. So I'm just going to say slate, or what I often do, I think for my example, I just put in the output name so I remember, hey, I need to change that, right? So that's how I determine that, the name of the comp. Alright, so I'm going to save that now and then open up a new project. Alright, so I'm going to import the plates from that previous example I showed you at the beginning. So let's go and find those, pull those in, and then you probably just pull those in, make a new composition. But the first thing that you want to do is right click over that comp and then type in one more frame to the duration. And if you don't see frames here, if you see the full time code, remember you just hold down Control and that switches it. So if you go back into composition settings, now this is in time code, hold down Control and then it will be in frames, which is, I always prefer working in frames. Okay, so I added one to that, and then we have to go to the very end of the composition right here, and we want to move this over to the last frame. So I'm going to click the right bracket key with the layer selected. Okay, so this is going to leave a blank frame at the very beginning for our slate, and then on frame 1 the plates start. Okay, so let's go and find that slate. Okay, so we import that project, and then I just want to grab this comp, drag that down here. Okay, first thing we need to open up that comp, turn off the shy, pull these up, paste them, and then delete that comp. It's a very hacky way of doing this, and I'm sure there's a better way, but this is what I use and it works quite well for me. Then you can click the shy again, and then you are good to go determining your handles. So in this case, your handles would be all the way at the end here, and we could go right at the very beginning and say, let's say there's no handles. Just pull this down, and then there you go. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial, or at least learned something useful about expressions. I find a lot of people kind of shy away from expressions because they don't really know what they're doing, but I would encourage you to just learn as much as you can, even to do very specific things. When I started doing some expressions, it was mostly just things like, oh, a wiggle expression, and then expanding that to have a little bit more complicated wiggle expressions to doing a full slate. So everything that we've done here is not terribly complex, but it does help to have a little bit of knowledge of coding. As I said, After Effects' expressions are based on JavaScript, so if you learn any JavaScript, you can apply a lot of that knowledge into After Effects. Alright, so I hope this has been informative to you, and I'll see you next time.